Jair Bolsonaro says he's mobilizing a further 200 soldiers to help in the search operation. The British journalist and Indigenous affairs expert disappeared on Sunday. They were working in a remote and potentially dangerous area of the Amazon rainforest known for mining and drug trafficking. Joining us now to discuss this is CNN's Shasta Darlington. She is live for us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Shasta, I'm wondering if authorities are giving you any idea if foul play is indeed involved here and whether or not these men were actually targeted.
Well, as you mentioned, Allison, I mean, without speculating, we know that a suspect has been detained, and we know that traces of blood were found in the boat. We have not heard what the police discovered once they tested those traces of blood, if they have the results yet, but they say they're investigating all possibilities. We also know, of course, that Pereira and Phillips were in a dangerous part of the far western region of the Amazon. They were in an area that's supposed to be reserved for indigenous groups, many of them uncontacted tribes, and yet where there have been repeated land invasions over the last few years with people trying to engage in illegal logging, illegal mining, illegal fishing and hunting, as well as drug trafficking. This is an area that's right next to the Peruvian and Bolivian border. So we're obviously waiting for more news, but a lot of what's happened is authorities have just come under fire at home and abroad for what critics call a slow and inefficient response. The feeling is that precious time was wasted because authorities didn't join the search and rescue efforts immediately. Now, Phillips and Pereira were headed out on what was supposed to be a 2-hour boat ride on Sunday morning, but they never arrived at their destination. So indigenous affairs groups immediately sent out search and rescue teams because they say the dangers in that area were well known. So they immediately wanted to get somebody out there. Unfortunately, authorities didn't join those efforts until the next day, Monday. They didn't get a helicopter in the air until Tuesday. And so this, despite the fact that a colleague of Pereira's was killed in that region in 2019. Both Pereira and Phillips had recently received death threats. So this has just caused a lot of anger and frustration. And as a result, Britain's acting ambassador to Brazil, the UN Human Rights Office, dozens of media editors, even soccer legend Pelé have all come out urging the Brazilian government to redouble its search and rescue efforts. In the meantime, we saw that at the Summit of the Americas, as you mentioned, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has defended the actions by authorities and said that they have all been working tirelessly to find the pair. But the fact is, with no sign of them, just this news that there are traces of blood in a boat, it's obvious that people are concerned and that fears are simply growing, Allison.
All right, CNN's Shasta Darlington live for us from Sao Paulo. Thanks very much for your reporting. And as you were talking about, Brazilian President Bolsonaro is in Los Angeles for the Summit of the Americas. And though he had a frosty relationship with U.S. President Joe Biden, the two leaders did have their first face-to-face meeting on Thursday. They spoke about preserving the Amazon rainforest, and Bolsonaro stressed that upcoming elections in Brazil would be free and fair.
This year we will be having elections in Brazil, and we do wish to have honest, clean, transparent, auditable, reliable elections so that there be no shadow of a doubt whatsoever following the elections. And I am quite certain that the elections will very much be carried out in this democratic spirit. I came to office through democracy, and I am quite certain that when I leave office, it will also be through democratic means.
In the U.S., inflation is soaring to its highest levels in 40 years. The May Consumer Price Index rose 8.6% year over year, above what economists had predicted. The markets are responding forcefully. U.S. President Joe Biden says Russia's war in Ukraine is keeping consumer prices uncomfortably high. And not just the United States. High inflation is a problem across the world right now, including the Eurozone, the UK, India, and Turkey. Matt Egan joins us now from New York with more. Matt, good to see you. So do these hot inflation numbers mean that a recession is kind of inevitable because the Fed is going to be forced here to raise interest rates more aggressively, thus avoiding a soft landing for the economy, which would impact economies around the world?
Well, Allison, I think the odds of a recession have gone up. for those reasons that you're talking about. The Fed is trying to tame inflation without causing a downturn, what's known as a soft landing. But it's going to be harder to do that because inflation keeps going further and further away from the Fed's goal, which is 2%. Now unexpectedly rising in the latest reading. And so that signals that inflation is in some ways spreading and actually a bigger problem than policymakers realized. And to your point, this is not just a U.S. problem. We're seeing high levels of inflation for the first time in a long time in major economies all around the world. And this is first because of COVID, which caused all of these supply disruptions and distorted demand. It's because governments around the world, especially in the United States, they responded forcefully with a lot of stimulus, central banks and fiscal authorities. And so on top of that, you've had waves after wave of COVID that have done more damage to supply chains. And then you layer on top of that the war in Ukraine, which is obviously causing energy prices to skyrocket, but it's also causing food prices to go up. In the United States, food prices rising at the fastest pace since 1981. Restaurant prices are rising at the fastest pace ever. So I think if you put all of this together, this is going to be a very difficult task for the Federal Reserve, for central bankers around the world. And Allison, this sets up what could be a historic Fed meeting next week in Washington. Two major Wall Street banks are now predicting that the Federal Reserve is going to have to do something that it hasn't done since 1994, raise interest rates by 0.75 percentage point in a single meeting. But the problem, of course, is that the more the Fed does, the greater the risk of an accident that causes a recession.
But won't the market regard an even tougher interest rate hike, a higher one of 0.75%? Wouldn't the market view that as a good move, that the Fed is really trying to get in front of this because it's been behind this inflation issue for so long?
I would argue that if the Fed surprises people and goes with a big interest rate increase, I think that that could be very good news for Main Street because, yes, borrowing costs would go up. But it would show that the Fed is really on top of this. I don't know if initially it would be great news for Wall Street because markets don't like surprises. And the Jerome Powell-led Fed has been pretty careful not to surprise investors by doing anything that it didn't telegraph ahead of time. So the issue is the Fed doesn't really have time to telegraph ahead of next week's meeting that it's going to go big. So that means it could rattle investors a bit if that's what actually happened. It's going to be very interesting to see how the Fed responds, not just next week, but all summer to this inflation crisis, Allison.
And we will be watching the moves from the Fed very closely along with you. Matt Egan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The Biden administration says it will scrap pre-departure COVID testing requirements for travelers entering the country. The move, which will be welcomed by airlines, is expected to go into effect at midnight on June 12th. Ukraine's military intelligence warns that Russia has the resources to continue the current pace of war for another year. It says Ukrainian troops are significantly outgunned, and everything now depends on what weaponry the West decides to provide. While Ukraine is fighting to hold on to two Donbas provinces under attack, it's getting new pledges of support from Britain. Defense Secretary Ben Wallace made an unannounced visit to Kyiv, vowing the UK will continue to send lethal aid that meets current and future threats facing Ukraine. He also said, quote, "I think we can push Russia out of Donbas." Britain and other countries are condemning death sentences issued to 3 foreign fighters in Ukraine. A court in the Russian-backed self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic found 2 Britons and 1 Moroccan guilty of being mercenaries. Ukraine says they were part of its armed forces and are prisoners of war. The United Nations says it's concerned.
Since 2015, we have observed that the so-called judiciary in these self-proclaimed republics has not complied with essential fair trial guarantees, such as public hearings, independence, impartiality of the courts, and the right not to be compelled to testify. Such trials against prisoners of war amount to a war crime. In the case of the use of the death penalty, fair trial guarantees are, of course, all the more important.
Let's go live to Ukraine and bring in our Ben Weidman. He is live for us in Kramatorsk. Ben, what are you seeing?
Well, Alison, what we're seeing is the real effects of this imbalance between Ukrainian and Russian forces, that many people who live close to the front lines are starting to realize that perhaps the Ukrainian forces may not be able to hold out much longer as they suffer from intense Russian artillery bombardments. Some people are staying, but others are saying perhaps it's time to leave.
The daily bread has arrived, 2 loaves per person in the frontline city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. There's no gas here, the bakeries don't work, so the loaves, 10,000, are trucked 10 hours here every day. Lilia has come with her 2 grandchildren and says she tries to shield them from the sounds of war. We tell them there are some guys playing with tanks, she says. How can I damage their mental health? You shouldn't do that. It's impossible. That's the roar of outgoing Ukrainian fire. Tetiana is a volunteer helping hand out the bread. Leaving Bakhmut is out of the question. I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, she tells me. I love them all. I want all of us to live here. It's our land. Everything will be fine. God protects us. Pavlo Dyachenko's job is to investigate every strike, every damaged building for the Bakhmut police.
Airstrike any time. In the morning, in the evening. We don't know when it's going. People have a damage.
He takes us to a school struck by Russian warplanes Wednesday. 2 passers-by were injured. Classes haven't been held for months. Not far away, a complex of agricultural warehouses has been hit. Workers salvage what they can. Shrapnel tore into the roof of one warehouse containing a precious resource. We don't know the motives of the Russians for hitting this facility. It's been struck 3 times, most recently on Thursday morning. But one cannot but wonder if all of this Ukrainian grain is the target. Lyudmila and her 2 children have been staying at this city-run dormitory since March. They fled the shelling on her nearby town. She's pondered leaving to a safer part of the country, but doesn't have enough money, and in the end asks, what's the point? The Russians are coming. It's the same everywhere, she says. When they, the Russians she means, are done here, they'll go further. Yet others aren't so fatalistic, reminded as they wait for the bus out of the city why they should go. Igor, a beekeeper in peacetime, is leaving with his cat, Simon Semyonich. I left everything here, he says, my bees and my house with all my belongings. They load their bags on the bus and go.
And of course, when you wonder about why these people are leaving, the numbers really, Alison, say enough. For instance, one Ukrainian official told The Guardian that Ukrainian forces are able to fire between 5,000 and 6,000 rounds a day, compared to about 60,000 incoming rounds coming from the Russians. Alison?
Ben, your piece was amazing, showing what people are really going through there. Thanks very much for your reporting. Still to come, evidence of a conspiracy. The U.S. House Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol is pointing directly at Donald Trump, saying he plotted to stay in office even after he lost the election. And climate activists are joined by a familiar face to emphasize how women are affected by the climate crisis. That story next.
Culinary Journeys, in association with Ajinomoto.
In these hallways and classrooms, Chef Natsuko Shoji is a bit of a rock star. The chef and owner of the French restaurant Ete has returned to her Tokyo high school to guide a new generation of aspiring chefs. She teaches them everything, from the business aspects of the job to meeting sustainability goals.
Hearing that these students are inspired by me makes me very happy. Objectively, I think my collaboration with fashion and art does get their attention. In all, I just really want to let the younger generation know how wonderful it is being a chef.
The pandemic reminded us of how important diet is to health. That's why the Ajinomoto Group is committed to solving health issues around the world at the dinner table. A real solution means never settling for less.
ถึงแม้ว่าจะต้องลดความเค็มในอาหารลงแต่เราก็ต้องไม่ละทิ้งความอร่อยเราต้องการให้ทุกท่านได้เพลิดเพลินกับรสชาติความอร่อยของอาหารไปพร้อมกับสุขภาพที่ดี
A saúde é importante, mas queremos considerar também o legado do sabor regional. Como podemos melhorar o balanço nutricional, mantendo o respeito à cultura gastronômica? Esse é o nosso desafio.
Tempat yang jauh pun bukan masalah. Kami selalu bisa menyediakannya. Kami terus mengupayakan dunia di mana siapapun bisa mengakses makanan bergizi dimanapun mereka berada.
We're here to provide nutritious meals to the entire world without compromising on taste, local ways of life, or accessibility, because that is nutrition without compromise.
Eat well, live well.
All new African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. Transform lives. Meet the photographers who are capturing stories on equality and social justice.
I felt that it was my responsibility to document our realities.
African Voices Changemakers, this weekend on CNN, in association with Glow.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
London's High Court has denied an injunction seeking to stop the UK from deporting asylum seekers to Rwanda. That means the United Kingdom can send its first flight of refugees to the East African nation as soon as next week. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government is hoping it will dissuade people from crossing the English Channel into the UK. But the plan is coming under massive backlash from human rights experts and is still under judicial review. Let's take a look at the other key stories making international headlines today. Protests broke out across India on Friday in continued uproar against comments made by an official in India's ruling party about the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Police in New Delhi say they've filed a complaint against the party official for inciting people on divisive lines. Malaysia is set to abolish the mandatory death penalty. The country's law minister says serious crimes, which include drug trafficking, will instead have alternative punishments at the discretion of the courts. The move has been cautiously welcomed by human rights groups. Over 3,000 prisoners convicted of cannabis offenses have been released in Thailand after the country legalized the growing and consumption of marijuana in food and drinks on Thursday. It's the first Asian country to delist marijuana as a narcotic drug. On Capitol Hill in Washington, it was the culmination of an attempted coup. That's how the chairman of the House committee investigating the January 6th riot is describing that day. The committee held a nationally televised hearing outlining how it says former President Donald Trump orchestrated a multi-tiered conspiracy to hold on to his office, and that led directly to the violent insurrection at the Capitol. CNN's Pamela Brown has the disturbing details.
Priority. We just had protesters. T-circle, breach the line. We need backup.
Chilling new aerial footage showing the moment protesters breached the Capitol grounds on January 6.
But this is now effectively a riot.
The new video, part of the debut primetime hearing of the Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol attack.
Donald Trump, the President of the United States,
spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution to march down the Capitol and subvert American democracy.
The focus immediately turning to the role of the former president in those crucial hours when a mob descended on the Capitol.
President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack.
Committee Vice Chair Republican Representative Liz Cheney referencing then-President Trump's alleged 7-point plan to overturn the 2020 election, which a committee source said included possibly replacing the acting attorney general and instructing state officials to create false electors.
Aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, "Maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it."
Testimony also revealed that it was Pence who called Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley, demanding that the National Guard defend the Capitol. Milley had further testified that the president's chief of staff called him to say that they needed to dispel the narrative that the president was not taking action.
We need to establish the narrative that that the president is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or Woodstock thing. I immediately interpret that as politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly.
Previously recorded testimony from former Attorney General Bill Barr disputing the president's claims of election fraud was played.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit.
That was enough to convince the president's daughter and former advisor, Ivanka Trump.
I respect Attorney General Barr, so I accepted what he was saying.
The committee says the president had been told by at least 4 close aides that he had lost re-election. Testimony played reveals that at least one individual associated with the campaign even told him he was likely to lose the election.
At some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who is the lead data person, was brought on, and I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
The committee placed a huge emphasis on the role of 2 extremist groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. Both groups were visibly present at the Capitol on January 6 and were some of the first to break into the Capitol building.
I am not allowed to say what's going to happen today because everyone's just going to have to watch for themselves. But it's going to happen.
Never before seen security footage from inside Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's office shows the moment everyone fled the scene. A GOP source with direct knowledge says McCarthy's staff was scared that day, and Cheney stated that McCarthy was calling Trump's allies and family members to try to persuade the president to intervene. Now, McCarthy, along with several other GOP members of Congress, have refused to comply with requests to testify before the committee.
He's patently embarrassing himself. If he were truly a leader within the House, he would want to get to the truth and the facts, which is where he started, but somewhere he went off the rails on that.
The committee also claims that multiple Republican lawmakers, including Representative Scott Perry, were advocating for pardons in the final weeks of the administration. The committee also heard live testimony from documentarian Nick Quested and Capitol Police Officer Caroline Edwards, who were both on the ground. Many Capitol officers were in attendance, watching on as one of their own testified about the extensive injuries she sustained as one of the first officers on the scene.
What I saw was just a war scene. I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
Pamela Brown, CNN, Washington.
Nobel Peace Prize laureate Malala Yousafzai joined climate change protesters outside the Swedish parliament on Friday. She stood alongside activists Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Nakayet at the protest, which has been held every week since 2018. All three emphasized that women are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. Yousafzai mentioned how her own education was interrupted by climate change when her school was flooded. She stressed that when girls don't have access to education, it can hold back efforts to curb the climate crisis.
The Taliban and their de facto government are continuing to find excuses to stop girls from school, and we know that when girls do not have access to education, it can worsen the climate-related events. And Fridays for Future was also very active in Afghanistan as well. There were young activists who were supporting the causes. They were highlighting how there was pollution in their communities, how they were also impacted by the climate-related events, and they were also highlighting that even though Afghanistan was contributing the least to climate change, they were also receiving the worst of its impacts.
The shipwreck of a royal warship has been revealed off the coast of England after being kept secret for more than a decade. The Gloucester sunk in 1682. At the time, it was carrying the Duke of York, and he narrowly escaped to eventually become King James II of England.
I think there's massive potential there. I mean, when you think that a lot of the items we've been conserving comes from a chest, and there could be a number of other chests down there and what they contain and what they're going to tell us about life in that period in the 17th century is really exciting.
The discovery has been kept secret for the past 15 years to protect it from plunderers. A mystery in the U.S. state of Texas is prompting speculation about just what's prowling around there. Have a look. What do you think? A wolfman? Or Bigfoot? I don't know. This image was captured by a security camera at the Amarillo Zoo last month. Now the city wants folks to guess what it is. Some are thinking it's just a coyote jumping the fence. Others are convinced it's a werewolf or Rocket Raccoon from Guardians of the Galaxy, or even Sonic the Hedgehog. Let me know what you think. Tweet me or something. And read all about it. Prince William was spotted on the streets of London selling copies of a charity magazine. These photographs show Britain's prince wearing the red cap and vest associated with The Big Issue, a magazine normally sold by the homeless. The Big Issue offers homeless individuals a way to earn income by selling it to the public. While Prince William has declined to comment, he has often visited homeless shelters with his mother, the late Princess Diana, as part of her charity work. Thanks for watching. I'm Allison Cossack, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Allison Cossack. Feel free to follow me there. It is the weekend. Enjoy it. World Sport is up next. I'll see you next week.
Ready? Alex Jones.
Those thought patterns, the three percenters, QAnon group, or the anti-vaxxers, they all originate from Alex.
How much damage can one man do to school shooting victims?
Alex Jones lied about Sandy Hook.
And the country.
The people who listen to him believe the things that he says.
CNN asks those who know him.
He's not like you or me.
Truth doesn't really matter at all.
CNN Special Report, Megaphone for Conspiracy. Alex Jones, Monday on CNN.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
The gloves are off at the Saudi Live Golf Series and things are getting physical. Find out what happened when golf writer Alan Shipnuck attended Phil Mickelson's press conference. The Boston Celtics gunning for a first NBA title in 14 years, but will this man ruin the party? And watch out, Wimbledon, he's back. Andy Murray rolls back the clock. Hello and welcome along to CNN World Sport with me, Christina McFarlane, where we begin with the battle threatening to change the game of golf forever. Now, if that sounds dramatic, it's because the events of the past 2 days at the Saudi-backed Live Golf Tournament have literally driven a wedge between the players who dare and the players who care. At least that's how it's being talked about after 17 golfers were sanctioned by the PGA Tour as play got underway at the Centurion Club on Thursday and then Friday's second round. That included six-time major champion Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, Sergio Garcia and Charles Schwartzel, with the South Africans still leading the way heading into Saturday's final round. They will all no longer be eligible to participate on the PGA Tour or the President's Cup. But despite the retribution, that hasn't stopped another major champion from turning his back on the PGA in the past few hours. Former US Open winner Bryson DeChambeau has confirmed he too will be joining the Renegade Series. That's despite one of his sponsors, Rocket Mortgage, terminating their contract with him as a result. Although, let's face it, DeChambeau now won't exactly be short on earnings. And it's clear the battle lines are being drawn now on and off the course too, as our Alex Thomas found out when speaking to golf journalist Alan Shipnuck, who had a pretty unsettling confrontation with tournament security guards while attending Mickelson's press conference on Thursday.
Alan, great to have you on the show. Why is Phil not talking yet? Because he's normally full of plenty of words.
Yeah, this is a first for him, really, to be at a loss for words. I think the ground is shifting so quickly beneath the players' feet. They're trying to figure out what the landscape is going to look like legally, what kind of support they're getting from their peers, their corporate sponsors. It's just better to say nothing than, like Dustin Johnson, to pledge your fealty to the tour and then do an about-face a few months later and look ridiculous. So I think a lot of players are just going to sit this out for the time being.
Do you think he knew what was coming?
Yes. Monahan had to do something. Like, he'd threatened to suspend these guys. If he didn't, he would have looked even more ineffectual than he actually is already. And it had to be some sort of showing of strength. Now, to me, this is all written in pencil. It's subject to negotiations and court orders and revisions. I don't think these guys will be suspended a year from now, but as of right now, yes, they are.
Because Monahan didn't have to go for the nuclear option. Live Golf had offered to work with them.
I think eventually they will work together, but he needed a showing of deterrence, because if you're a PGA Tour player and you see your buddies over here making insane amounts of money, looks like, pretty user-friendly golf course, London's a great town, it's got to be tempting. So he's just trying to thwart all these other players who are thinking about it.
Now, this became super controversial, of course, when Alan revealed the comments that Phil Mickelson had told him in a phone interview ahead of a biography that Alan was writing about Phil Mickelson, where the famous scary Saudis quote and more. Alan wasn't accredited for this event initially, but then was given media accreditation like I've got and our CNN crew here. But when he tried to join the media huddle after Mickelson's first round on Thursday, he was escorted away by security. Is that a first?
Actually not. I've been thrown out of much nicer places than the Centurion press room, but sometimes when you're doing your job, you have to push the envelope a little bit. And so, but it was a weird scenario. I mean, it was an outdoor press conference. I was just standing in the back row, as you saw, just kind of observing. I hadn't even decided if I was going to ask Phil a question. He had said through intermediaries he didn't really want to speak to me, but that's not his decision. I'm here to do my job. He's the biggest newsmaker at a very important event. So it was an awkward moment, it's just revealing of Norman's kind of strong arm tactics. Obviously, he's sort of inculcated.
Greg Norman, the CEO of Live Golf.
Yeah, he sort of inculcated the way the Saudis do business, and so it was a weak moment on their part. Like, you know, I'm a reporter doing my job. Like, what are they afraid of?
Yeah, I think we can show our viewers the tweet you put out, which was the little exchange you had with Norman, saying that, you know, his goons had removed you. Norman saying, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," and then you screenshotted a video that actually I took over my shoulder while trying to interview Mickelson myself, that quite clearly showed Greg orchestrating things in the background. Is some of it just part of any new startup that's at all controversial, that they're just trying to work out their relationship with the press? Because actually the media people, it's been the same as any other tournament in some ways.
Yeah, the people in the tent are delightful. Like, they're professionals. They've been doing this for a long time, for other tours. Like, they know what they're doing. But, you know, Norman is a very specific personality. He's a control freak. He's used to getting his way. He doesn't like to be challenged. He's always surrounded himself by yes men. So there's obviously pushback from an independent, free press. He doesn't want to hear it, but that, you know, it's kind of too bad, Greg.
And the point is, Mickelson's not just playing in this; he's orchestrated it, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's almost a de facto playing commissioner. I mean, he's the biggest newsmaker at a very important moment for the sport, and for him to not answer questions and to try and duck certain reporters, again, it's just revealing of their mindset. That they want the money, they don't want the accountability, but that's just not how it works.
Do you think there are players that have stayed loyal to the PGA Tour that actually kind of think how Phil does, about not getting as much of the PGA Tour's revenues in percentage terms as, say, players in the NBA, MLB and NFL?
Yeah, I mean, silently, all the tour players are kind of hoping that there's a middle ground where they can maintain their membership, get the FedEx Cup bonuses and all the pension and all the huge money that flows to them now, but then they could cherry pick some of these live events. That's the best case scenario for the players. So I think they're kind of cheering Phil on behind the scenes and hoping that this does succeed in some way and this middle ground is forged. But yeah, there's always been a low grade unhappiness from the players, that the books aren't open. There's a sense that the tour is holding out on them, and even as the Saudi competition has arrived, the tour is funneling more money to the players. That's made some of them more unhappy. They're like, why didn't you give us money all along? Why are you just turning the spigot on now? It almost confirms their belief that the tour has been holding out on them. So Monahan, the PGA Tour commissioner, is kind of damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. You know, he's got to give more money to superstars to buy their happiness, but then the question is, why didn't we have that money sooner? So it's a very interesting wrinkle in all of this.
It's not too much to say this is all out civil war now.
It's trending in that direction. I mean, this being golf, there's this veneer of gentility, but as you know, I saw from Norman's goons, like, they do want to play hardball if they have to. So this is the whole world order of professional golf is at stake here.
Alan Shipnuck speaking to our Alex Thomas there. Well, meanwhile, those who are still committed to the PGA Tour were in action today in the second round of the Canadian Open, including Rory McIlroy and Justin Thomas. Both have been outspoken this week about remaining on tour for the good of golf. McIlroy is 4 strokes back of leader Wyndham Clark. They have a few holes remaining in the second round. Justin Thomas is at 3 under through 16 holes. OK, Chile call foul play against Ecuador, and FIFA have had their say. Find out if they'll be in or out of the World Cup.
Almost all carbon emissions come from industries that shape our world. But at Standard Chartered, we believe progress doesn't have to cost our planet. That's why we're mobilizing $300 billion to help our clients change the way they operate, accelerating the transition to a net zero world. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
Welcome back. Ecuador are breathing a sigh of relief after finding out they will play in the Qatar World Cup later this year after Chile's claims they were fielding an ineligible player were dismissed by FIFA. The Chilean Football Federation said last month it had proof that Ecuador's Byron Castillo was born, in fact, in Colombia and played using a false passport and birth certificate. Chile finished 7th in qualifying, but are planning to appeal, claiming if they had been awarded the points from the 2 games against Ecuador in which Castillo played, Chile would have gone to the World Cup instead. Now, it hasn't been the best UEFA Nations League campaign for World Cup holders France so far. Les Bleus were winless heading into their clash with Austria, looking to get back on track. But it did not start well for them in Vienna. Some shocking defending, allowing the hosts to take the fairly late in the first half through Andreas Weimann. It looked like France were headed to a second defeat in 3 games, but substitute Kylian Mbappe smashed in the equaliser with less than 10 minutes remaining. The match would end in a 1-1 draw. So here's what it means for Group 1. France sit bottom with just 2 points from 3 matches. Denmark still top on 6 points despite their defeat to Croatia. All right, the Warriors looking to bounce back in the NBA Finals, but that will depend on this guy. A Steph Curry injury update coming for you after the break.
I was trafficked at the age of 18. I was a single young mom trying to figure out how to put myself through school. I was lured off of a college campus in Eugene, Oregon, and I was trafficked to Las Vegas mainly for nearly 6 years. My name's Rebecca Bender, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Rebecca Bender Initiative. The way that we mentor survivors of human trafficking is through our initiative called the Elevate Academy. Elevate Academy is really a holistic school that invites survivors to join a cohort of other people just like them. They get a mentor, they get a life coach. We help take them through a number of classes, some of which are really about deeper levels of healing. When I was able to finally escape from my trafficker, I can remember during that time I had been traded and sold between 3 different traffickers. I had 2 men tattoo their names on my back like a piece of cattle. I have been to jail multiple times, had my face broken in 5 places. I was really hopeless and I didn't know how I was going to get out. Finally, a federal investigation led to my trafficker's arrest, and I went home to a family that was really supportive. But we know in this fight against trafficking that that's not the case for everybody. So not only am I really grateful, but I'm also really determined to help communities learn how to be that family for survivors that are trying to rebuild their lives.
Culinary Journeys. Meet Japan's Natsuko Shoji, a chef earning rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, Sunday on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.
Welcome back. Game 4 of the NBA Finals between the Boston Celtics and the Golden State Warriors is set to tip off in a few hours in Boston. The Celtics took a 2-1 lead on Wednesday in the best-of-7 series and are now halfway to winning their first NBA title since 2008. Meanwhile, Golden State star Steph Curry is confident he will play despite suffering an injury in Game 3. Koi Wire is here with more.
Christina, the Warriors have reached the NBA Finals 6 times in the past 8 seasons. They know how to deal with adversity and handle the big stage, but they're down 2-1 in this series with Boston. Game 4 is in Boston again, and Steph Curry's now dealing with a foot injury. He got rolled up on in the final minutes of their loss in Game 3 on Wednesday, caught under a pile. The 2-time league MVP clearly in pain, but he says it'll take more than that to keep him out of this game. Listen.
I'm going to play. That's all I know right now. I know exactly what it is and what I got to deal with and the soreness/pain level and all that. So once I got checked out last night, I knew I wouldn't have to go get any extra tests just because we've been through this before.
Curry said he has a comfort level with this injury, how to deal with it and how to play on it because he had a similar one during the regular season. C-Mac, the Warriors, they have a little bit of road warrior in them. They're hoping to extend their NBA record streak of 26 consecutive series with at least one road win. And that streak dates all the way back to 2013, and we'll know in a few hours if it's going to hold true again.
Oh, thanks to Koi. Well, it's perhaps not surprising that with a place in the Stanley Cup finals at stake, tensions are running high in the Eastern Conference finals. It certainly got pretty heated at the end of Tampa Bay Lightning's 3-1 win over the New York Rangers, which leaves the Lightning just one win away from the big one. The Rangers were looking to bounce back after Game 5 after 2 straight defeats, and we're back with a full-strength team, but it wasn't to be. A goal late in the third period from Andre Palat put the Lightning ahead and saw them close out a 3rd straight win to go 3-2 ahead in the series and leave them just a win away from their 3rd straight appearance in the Cup final. Now, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but does it always tell the true story?
All new Inside Africa. Go inside the inventive minds, evolving places, and creative trends of the Africa you need to know now. Explore how NFT pioneers find new opportunities for Africa's creative community.
This technology gives them a shot to be seen by a global family of collectors.
Inside Africa, this weekend on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
We're here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here. People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly?
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much?
Raise your hand if you love school. I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you. You can hear gunshots every couple minutes. Now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their story.
I am Nigerian by blood, British by birth, and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
Welcome back. Elle magazine here in the UK has published a special edition this week with 3 front covers featuring some pretty incredible images of the stars of women's football set to shine at next month's European Championship in England. They include the likes of Pernille Harder and Magda Eriksson, Beth Mead and Lucy Bronze. They say a picture can paint 1,000 words, but it can also set the agenda. And it's for that reason there's been a fascinating exhibition here in London called In Focus, Women's Sport Through the Lens, looking at the portrayal of women in sport over the last 50 years through some of the most iconic photos. One of the exhibition's curators, Anna Kessel, the women's sport editor at The Telegraph, spoke to Amanda Davis about some of her favourite images.
The thing about women's sport is that it's so invisible and has been so invisible for so long. I mean, it's only recently that we've really started to see a change, particularly in sports media. So the idea behind this exhibition was to really put women's sport up on the biggest platform that we could and show people how powerful and impactful these images are.
Let's kick off with a really iconic image. Serena at Roland Garros. This catsuit was banned, though, wasn't it? Do you think it would have been banned if somebody else had worn it?
That's a hard question to answer. When you consider that actually one of the courts at Roland Garros is named after a French icon called Suzanne Lenglen, who famously stripped off her corsets and was a total rebel. She used to drink brandy by the courtside and did all sorts of things that were extremely controversial. She's celebrated, and yet, you know, decades and decades later, Serena wearing a medical outfit is banned.
What do you see when you look at this picture of Taylor Harris?
I sort of see 2 things. One makes me feel quite uncomfortable because there's this kind of focus around her groin that, you know, I think for a lot of women makes us feel vulnerable. It feels like an intimate area that you don't really want to share. I think it was, you know, the pylons that resulted off the back of it, the trolling that she received, and then her brilliant put-down response that was like, you know, this is just me doing my day job. And then I think people began to see the picture in different ways and began to say, actually, oh my goodness, look at the athleticism here. Look at the power, look at the determination and focus in her face, which is so incredible, which is why, you know, eventually a statue was actually built to honour this moment.
Sarah's story. Why have you chosen this one?
Sarah has always done things on her own terms. She talked a lot about breastfeeding, and she actually breastfed her daughter until quite an older age. I think it was sort of around 3 or so. And she spoke very openly about that journey. These were conversations that we'd never heard a sportswoman talk about before, and I think resonated across the population at a time where we were still kind of working out, how do we feel about breastfeeding? Can we even breastfeed in public?
In terms of moments shared publicly, this is up there.
Sophie Power, in the middle of an ultra-marathon, I think it was about 44 hours long or something insane. The whole reason that she was at this race, just 3 months postpartum, was because she was refused permission to defer her entry. So you can defer race entry, for example, if you have jury service, or it could be for injury, but for pregnancy, for many races around the world, you are not allowed to. And she wanted to make a stand against this. She thought it was wrong. She knew that women worked incredibly hard to achieve the times that they did, and you might fall pregnant at a time where you don't expect to, and then to have to forfeit all of that hard work, all of that training, just because of pregnancy and start all over again felt wrong.
And this is one of those moments where sport is leading the way, in many ways educating society as to these issues that a lot of people don't know about.
I think Caster Semenya is a really good example of that. You know, a DSD athlete, differences of sexual development. I remember covering her story.